Welcome, magnificent friends, to a new episode of the Beyond Influence video series with special guest, Tony Pisanelli. And today's topic you're going to love. This is going to help you see your career in a completely different light. So I'm excited to welcome Tony, who is a career transformation coach, helping business professionals who are 45 or older transform their career from employment disruption and life turmoil into a secure, sustainable, and satisfying working life. He is the creator of the E3 Career Transformation Method, a system that identifies your unique value, helps you overcome the pain of the past, and helps you safely step into a more entrepreneurial future. And you can learn more about Tony at tonypisanelli.com. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, Loris. Pleasure to be with you.
It's such a fascinating topic that we're going to talk about today. But to go into that, we need to understand what motivated you to become a career coach, but not just a career coach, but someone who focuses on helping career professionals assume an entrepreneurial mindset.
All right. Yes. So the entrepreneurial mindset will be a key focus here. All right. So, Cloris, I worked in the corporate world for over 3 decades, and I started at a time when you were virtually guaranteed a job for life, provided you were a fairly solid citizen. And that, with the changes in technology and more competition in the marketplace, that quickly changed. And you could come in one morning with a job and go in that night leaving without one. Yes. And I witnessed people who lost their job. And for one group of people, it was a devastating loss. And on the other hand, another group of people, it was an opportunity. They experienced a sense of freedom. So I started investigating, well, what was the dynamic here? The same event, someone has lost their job, but 2 different people reacted totally different. And I identified the difference was one person had more of an employee mindset. They were desperate to hold on to their job. The other one had more of an entrepreneurial mindset. They were looking for the next opportunity. And what I found is the person who had the entrepreneurial mindset, before they had been made redundant, had already started creating their next future. One person had brought a classic car, a limousine, and on Saturday afternoons would drive brides to the church. And that became an alternate source of income. If he ever lost his corporate job, he would just switch over to something else. Another person bought old homes, renovated them. Some he sold and some he kept to earn rental income. So can you see this entrepreneurial mindset was not solely dependent on an organisation and one job. What was also interesting, Cloris, was the person with the entrepreneurial mindset wasn't just the leaders of the organisation, they could be people at lower levels. So I sort of started to glean that the entrepreneurial mindset exists in all of us if properly developed and can make the difference in terms of how we respond to that devastating moment. So that's why the entrepreneurial mindset is a key part of my coaching in terms of a person's career trajectory.
I love that. It makes a huge difference in the way how you react and the way how you live your life, really. So then that leads me to ask that next question, which is the focus of our conversation today, and that's the career character types, right? So it's very much related to what path you're going to choose. So tell us more about that. What are the career character types and why they matter?
Okay, so the 3 career character types is something I've leveraged from the work of Michael Gerber. I take it you would have heard of Michael. He has written a number of books around the E-Myth series. So Michael is a small business expert. And what he found over the years, because about 80% of people who go into small businesses fail, he started working out why that was. And he identified 3 career character types. So first one is the technician. They go into a small business and they do all the activities in the business. They provide the service, they do the sales and marketing, they do all the paperwork, they put out the garbage, they answer phone calls, and over time, Cloris, they burn out. Okay, and that's one reason the business fails. Then there's also the manager type he talks about, and that's the person who organises, plans and prioritises and schedules. That person is more likely to succeed in business, in a small business, because they don't do all the work, but they may delegate the lower priorities to someone else. I would trust in your business that you're conducting this session with me, but you've got an automated email sequence. So that's you managing the business. That's not you sending out emails manually. You're managing it in a way that makes your time more effective.
Right.
Okay. Which goes a long way for you to sustain your small business. Then you have the entrepreneurial type, who Michael says works on the business. They're the more creative type who's looking out into the future. So Cloris, if something happens and one day we hit a point where podcasts are no longer fashionable, people stop listening to them, as an entrepreneur, do you have a plan in terms of how you'll replace that activity?
Right.
So that's the entrepreneurial type. Okay. You need to have all 3 in proper balance. If you've just skewed to one, such as the technician, you're going to be out of business. The reason I've built on Michael's work, Cloris, is because in the corporate world, I saw the same 3 people. Okay, so there was the person who was the technician. They were the doer.
Right.
They were seen as a unit of production. Then you had the manager who was organising, planning and making sure those units of production were productive and effective. And then you had the leaders in the company that were looking at moving the company into the future. So why does that matter was the second part of your question. Well, as the employment landscape has become more uncertain, it puts each one of those character types at different levels of risk. So if you're a unit of production, the employee, the technician, your job, your little unit can be sent overseas to places like the Philippines and India, as we started to see, where it can be done cheaper.
Right.
So you're at loss, a potential job loss. Secondly, your job can be automated. Very early on in my career, the organisation I worked for had about 80 or 90,000 people. And on one particular floor, there was about 100 people, and their job was to update someone's payroll details on a card, pen and card, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
And when the computer finally arrived, someone in a central office, just all they needed to do was to press a button and everyone's payroll details got updated. So 100 people were out the door in one hit. Okay, so that's your employee. If you're just doing a standard job, you are very vulnerable being replaced by automation being outsourced. Then you have a manager. They're also at risk. If you're managing the units of production and they've gone, then you'd need less managers. Or if the company is looking to rationalise and reduce the number of layers so they can compete more effectively in the marketplace and be more timely, as a manager, you could lose your job. Then as a leader, if you've been in a company for 25, 30 years and you've worked your way up, there's a perception that you've sort of become stale and old and your ideas are no longer cutting edge. They could get rid of you also. So each of the three levels in a company have different risk profiles. So that's why it's important to understand where you sit and what your risks are. And that's one of the elements I coach around, is understanding that and building a plan so that it protects them from that devastating moment.
I see. Wow, that's fascinating. So you said that we all have maybe a predominant character type, right? Like something that we tend to do more, we tend to behave. You mentioned that it's good to have a balance. So in the assessment that you do to figure out what our career character type currently is, you do that and then you move on into, okay, well, it looks like there's a big imbalance here. Let's fix that. Or you basically work with your career character type and then just try to manage the risk instead. Like how is the work that you do with the client?
All right. So before I commence my work with a client, Cloris, I typically look at their resume. Okay. And the way they describe themselves gives me a pretty good clue very early whether they fit into the employee category, the manager category, or the leadership category. So if they are the technician, the employee type, they tend to describe themselves in terms of what they do. Okay. And their resume tends to be very long. Okay. If they're the manager type, they describe themselves in terms of their skills, their experiences, and their achievements. Okay. Their resumes are a little bit shorter. If they're the entrepreneurial type, they don't have a resume. They have a value statement. The value statement articulates, this is what I take someone from or an organisation from, which is typically a pain point, and I take them into a brighter future. There's a transformation that goes on. That's the entrepreneur. So that's where I look for in the resume. Is there an element where they're capable of transforming an old world into the future? So that's what I'm looking for. That's why when I start working for them, with them, I start getting a sense of where they fit into that picture.
I see. Very interesting. So then I guess once you know what your career character type is, then you can basically prepare, make adjustments so you are minimizing the risk and you're maximizing your possibilities to expand your role within the organization or even make a different move if something happens and you lose your job. Is that correct?
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't necessarily advocate that a person needs to leave the corporate world.
Right.
If that's where you fit in and you enjoy your work, you can stay there. As long as you're growing and developing some capability that's valuable potentially on the outside world. So firstly, don't be dependent on an organisation and don't be someone who believes that the company you work for owes you a living for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's just a poor assumption to make in today's world.
Very dangerous one. Yeah.
It's extremely dangerous. And so let's develop that core capability. So very early on in my career, Cloris, I worked with a gentleman and I share his story in my lead magnet, which we can talk about later. And he was an accountant similar to me. So there was a typical accountant who came in, they did their work, went home, got paid. But this particular gentleman came in and he had a picture that in 10 years' time, he would set up his own financial planning business. He orchestrated the moves within the company to acquire the skills that would achieve that 10-year outcome. He moved into the planning role, he moved into taxation roles, he moved into investment roles to understand that picture. So even though we were both graduates and employees, he had a bigger picture about where his life was going to be and where the career fitted into that. And that's a trait or an attribute I try and instill into my coach. How can we turn your career into an apprenticeship for something greater?
True.
So that's one of the messages. Yes.
I love that. Love that. So then let's say that we are growing in our career and so forth. And, standing out is an important thing, whether you're going to stay in the corporate world or make a leap into becoming an entrepreneur. And I know you have developed this really great method to stand out. So can you walk us through that? What is the best way we can stand out in the marketplace?
Well, in terms of standing out or differentiating ourselves, okay, there's a couple of elements. And I would like to share a story, if I could, just to build the context here, if you like. 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, actually, it was August 2019, I needed to have some landscaping work done to my house, both the front yard and the backyard. I called the first landscaper. They visited the property. They checked things out. They promised to give me a quote, and I never heard from them again. That's not untypical of a trade where you may or may not hear from them, okay? So that person is not differentiated. He fits into a crowd, and okay. Then the second person who arrives came along one Saturday morning. He gets out of his vehicle and greets me at my front gate. He's dressed in an Australian bush hat, a black T-shirt, a pair of trousers that makes him look different from the standard other landscapers. He steps into my property, turns his head around, takes a quick look, and walks out. And I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here? He's not going to let me down as well. So he steps off my property and he starts gazing the bigger picture and starts looking at my house. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure what's going on here. I haven't asked him to fix my house. I just want him to do some landscaping work. So fortunately, he comes back into the property and I said, Dave, his name was Dave. What were you doing then? I'd like to understand. And he goes, before I design or redesign someone's garden, I take in the character of the home. Because he sees, when in his travels, he sees a lot of gardens where the garden doesn't fit the house. And there's just an awkward mismatch. So that's the first point of standing out, is understand your character and build your career around your own character, as he does. He is unique. He stands out from other landscapers because he is truly just himself. If you run into Dave at his work, or if you run into him at the local supermarket, he speaks the same way. There's no facade about Dave. He's just uniquely expresses himself. So that's the first way you stand out, by being who you are. The second way Dave stands out, and there's a lesson for all of us, he has a genuine enthusiasm for what he does. He loves his work. When he was, and it dates back when he was a young boy, 8 years of age, there's a lime tree in his backyard. His father says to him, Dave, that tree is dying. You are responsible to make sure it lives. So young Dave starts watering and fertilizing that tree. And it comes to life. And that sparked his interest in gardening, horticulture, landscaping. And he brings that same enthusiasm to every garden he walks into. When he would come into my house each day, he walked down the side pathway, you would hear him whistle. There's not many people, Cloris, who whistle to work. I remember when I used to catch a train and go into the city, and you see people come up the escalators, their heads bowed down, just trudging on their way to work. They just genuinely dissatisfied, and they were part of the herd, whereas Dave is just unique in terms of his genuine passion for what he does. He would come at certain days and he wasn't feeling well. After an hour in the sun and the fresh air in the garden, he just came back to life. So that was the second way Dave differentiated himself. He just genuinely loved what he did. The third way Dave differentiated himself, he would create, similar to what Walt Disney used to talk about, was a memorable experience in the mind of his clients. And how that differentiated from other landscapers. I had another neighbour in my street, and they also had their garden landscaped. They had a lawn put in their backyard, and after they had the lawn put in, the neighbour noticed that it wasn't fully levelled, properly levelled. They asked the landscaper to come back and add some more topsoil just to level things off, because there was just some little hole areas. That landscaper declined to come back and said, you'll be right, it'll work itself out. Whereas, in fact, Dave came back after he'd landscaped my garden for 3 months. He'd levelled off any areas of the soil of the lawn that needed to be done. And on one particular day, Cloris, and I've never forgotten this, I made my clothesline, putting some clothes on the line, and it was going to be a scorching hot day. And I heard his whistle. I didn't call him that day. And he came to bring a tarpaulin and cover one of the trees that he had planted, because he knew it wouldn't tolerate the heat of that day. He was so invested in what he did that differentiated him from that other landscaper who couldn't even be bothered to come back and check that lady's lawn. And I've never forgotten that experience. And you can hear it, the emotion in my voice. That's how you differentiate yourself. How can you create a unique experience that someone will never forget you for the right reason?
Right.
For the right reason.
Yeah, what an amazing story. I mean,
it is. And he is an amazing man, yes.
That is wonderful. So then I know that you expand on this in your guide that you have for us. So tell us about it, Tony, and how we can access it.
So, well, my guide is accessible from my website, from the homepage at tonypisanelli.com. In the guide, as I said, I shared a story of the gentleman who turned his career from not just being an employment situation, but a training apprenticeship,
right,
which is a philosophy I instill in all my clients. Robert Greene, who wrote a brilliant book called Mastery, in there he says, our life is an apprenticeship. If we pay attention, we're always being apprenticed. So make sure you're conscious of that. So that's one of the philosophies. In the ebook, I also cover 7 key principles that are the tenets of my E3 career transformation method. And I teach people that you really don't make your career a separate part of your life, but integrate it as a unique part of who you are. A lot of people, their career is an intrusion into their life, and it falsifies who they present themselves out in the world. During my corporate career, the bulk of the people I interacted with was a person acting in a role. There was a mask. There was a formal and professional voice. Whereas you very rarely encountered the person who was just naturally themselves. So that's one of my principles in the E3 career transformation method. It's so important to be who you are. It's also important to connect your career to a higher purpose. Okay. Because there's a trajectory during our career, and Maslow's hierarchy sort of lends itself to this, where you start your career and it's purely about centered around earning an income. Then it sort of progresses and it's about advancement. And in some cases, for some people in the corporate world, it's about power. And if you can clean up a few people along the way who get in front of you and they're a roadblock, they'll wipe you out. And then there's a third type of person, which is where I'm steering people and saying, no, your career is really about contribution and service. So there was a brilliant quote I came across by a gentleman called Horace Mann, and he said, be ashamed to die until you do something for humanity. Okay. So when I have a client in front of me, I look at their career and I say, in your working day, what is it that you do for humanity? So let me give you an example. There's a gentleman who's a builder. His name's Alex. And part of his work as a builder is about earning an income to support his family. And that's fair enough. I'm not there to take that away. But as Alex's career has progressed, and he's now in his 40s, if not early 50s, what he started to find was the body couldn't deal with the rigors of carrying stuff. And, you know, he'd have sore back, sore neck, knees, ankles, that sort of stuff. So he'd moved to a few days a week teaching at a TAFE college in terms of training the next level of builders, the new apprentices. Okay. There he does something for humanity, helping young men in their early 20s build their future careers. But what's really interesting, Cloris, when I was speaking to him, the greatest satisfaction he gets out of his day is actually counselling these young 20-year-olds, because that's the age profile where a lot of young men go off the rails. Some of them actually even commit suicide because life gets too much for them. So he steers them on the right path. He teaches them how to save money, not to go out on a Friday night and blow their week's salary on entertainment and drinks. So can you see that Alex has got a career that's complete? There's the income component and there's also a contribution component. So that's what I'm looking for in terms of you mentioned, you know, the E3 career transformation is about a secure, sustainable and satisfying. That's where he gets his greatest satisfaction. It's the contribution he gives back to others. Beautiful. So that's what the E3 career transformation method is, making sure we've got all those three elements covered.
Of course. Yeah, because one feeds from the other and it helps you feel fulfilled and make a difference and keep growing. So yeah, I love that. So a lot of our viewers and listeners, Tony, have already made that leap, right? They have gone from corporate life to starting their own business. So how would you say this information applies to them as they grow professionally in their own business? What is the role that their past experiences play? What is the role of these career personality types, and how can we incorporate them into what we do every day to reach that level of, okay, we're making a difference, we're doing something that matters, and I feel great about what I do.
Okay, so if you've already started your own small business, then your objective is to stay in that business. You don't want for it to fail and then go back to the corporate world. And many people do. But it's a sign that you actually didn't stand on your own 2 feet. Okay. It's not something we actually want to carry. So this is where the 3 career character types are important. If you're going to start your own business, understand what you're good at, your core strengths, and focus on a couple of 3 or 4 key priorities that you do in your business. Okay. And the lower priority stuff that can be done by someone at a lower wage level, you need to delegate to someone else. Okay. So step number 1, don't try and do everything in your business. Okay. Number 2, look at what you can automate. Technology is a brilliant, brilliant for us today. It can do a lot of things for us. How can I use technology to further leverage my time? One of the things I've learned through my coaching, as much as I love getting one-on-one people, because that's where you build a strong, deep connection, you also need to work one-to-many. That further leverages your time. So ask yourself the question, how can I get in front of many, not just the one? And the third way is make sure you wear your entrepreneurial hat in terms of what's happening in the future. Now, let's go back to Dave, okay, in terms of him staying in business. So Dave works for himself in a small landscaping business, Cloris, okay? So there's no corporation above him that's going to end his job, correct? But he could still go out of business. Okay, so how do we ensure that Dave doesn't go out of business? Well, number one, he is the technician in his business doing the physical work. Dave's now in his 40s. He's recognising when he gets up in the morning, it's a bit of a slow move. The muscles are sore, this aches, that aches. So he's recognised he can't work 6 days a week as a landscaper. Okay. So the lighter work is actually maintaining gardens rather than the landscaping where you're moving wheelbarrows full of dirt, bringing in heavy rocks, all that sort of stuff. The way he's done that, so he builds the garden, which is the landscaping, but he's managed his business by creating relationships with his clients so that he comes and maintains the garden, which is lighter work. So he does the physical work a few days a week so his body can deal with it. Then he manages, which is the lighter work. So there's the employee, the manager. So where's the entrepreneur for Dave? Was the question I asked Dave. Because I want to see all three to make sure he stays in business. And Dave said to me, well, I've got a deep knowledge of landscaping and horticulture. And he had started working with a business coach to get onto regional radio shows to teach people how to manage and look after their gardens. So he's now becoming a teacher. And I can verify he is a brilliant teacher because I would follow him. I would follow him around when he was doing work in my garden, just learning off this man. Recently, for example, he came back, and this is an example of his entrepreneurial mindset, to prune my maple tree, which has been in the garden for about 20 years. I had been pruning it in the past, Cloris, and because I'm a hacker when it comes to gardening, I turned this beautiful maple tree into something that looked like a spaceship. It was round and it was just all over the place. So the only person I now trust to prune this is Dave. So he came into the property, he pruned a few little branches off it, and then he stepped back. And for about 3 or 5 minutes, he is staring at this maple tree from a number of different angles. And I'm thinking, Dave, can you please tell me what you're doing? And he said, Tony, before I start pruning, I want to see what I want this maple tree to look like in 5 years' time. Okay? There's an example of the entrepreneurial mind.
Yeah.
Okay. How many of us are saying to ourselves in terms of our career, what do I want my career to look like in 5 years' time? And we start pruning and taking stuff away and adding things on around that. Can you see that Dave, as even a landscaper, has an entrepreneurial mindset? He's thinking into the future. What makes Dave also unique in terms of what he does and showing his entrepreneurial mindset. The entrepreneurial mindset isn't just, Cloris, about 5 years into the future.
No.
It's about having a bigger picture of the space around us. When he goes into a garden, he designs it in such a way that he tries to attract birds, bees, worms. He's looking at the whole ecosystem of the plant kingdom. He's got a bigger picture in mind.
Yeah.
He appreciates the importance of bees in terms of pollination and continuing. So it's also about, as an entrepreneur, a bigger picture,
Yes.
a bigger time frame. It's a contribution to something beyond just his income. How can I contribute and look after nature?
Yes.
Okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
I was thinking it's so easy as business owners to become just wrapped up into the day-to-day things, becoming a technician or a manager and just getting things done. And we don't look at our vision that we established maybe years ago, or we don't think about, the current trends. And by the time things have changed, it's too late and we cannot catch up. So I love that story. It's something I will remember for years to come, because it is so clear. So I love that. And I do have one more question for you. I know we're running short of time, but, this is a great mindset to assume. And you talk about it, in the guide that you have for us, the E3 career transformation method. It's wonderful, right? But we might be listening to that and saying, oh, yes, I'll do that at some point. I'll think about it. Change is hard. So what do you suggest to us if we're trying to assume that mindset, we're trying to change the way we think? What are some tips or guidance that you could give us?
Well, that's true. Change is really hard. But there's two ways to approach change. You can have change imposed on you from the outside world. And that change, Cloris, is called disruption. Or you can have change that you create from within yourself. And that change is called innovation. Okay. I, through my transformation method, seek for the person to create change through their own innovation rather than having themselves disrupted. I want to share one more story if I can.
Yes.
There was a lady, her name was Serena, is Serena, and she was a legal secretary. She had lost her job. She had lost every job she had worked in. Okay. One Friday afternoon, her boss calls her into her office. And as she's walking into the office, she's thinking, I've been doing an excellent job. My salary is going to be reviewed. I'm going to get more money. That's what Serena is thinking. She goes into the office, her manager sits down, and the manager says, Serena, I don't want you to come back on Monday. And Serena says quite innocently, so you want me to come back on Tuesday then? No, Serena, it's over. So Serena has had to experience change and disruption from the outside. So now she decides to take control and responsibility for her career and no longer be at the mercy of the changes imposed by an organisation where they can call you in at any moment and say it's over and you're the one that's devastated. To her credit, even though she'd lost her job a number of occasions, she kept getting up. A lot of people wouldn't have, which is an inspiring individual. So Cloris, where is Serena today? Serena is Serena Russo. She has an employment business. Her net worth is over $100 million. Today she runs an employment agency, helping people find work and stay in work. There is an entrepreneurial mindset in all of us if we can tap into it. There's no one going to take Serena's work away from it anymore. So yes, change is hard, but when you create the change from the inside and you're in control of your life, what happens on the inside becomes irrelevant. So that's my message to people, is don't have change imposed on you. And if it is, turn it to your advantage, which is what Serena has done. Sometimes it's the universe stepping in to say, you know what? Your life is bigger than working in an organisation. You can create your own.
Yeah.
And that's what Serena has done. Someone who lost her job so many times is now worth over $100 million in net worth. But her story is, in my eyes, worth far more than that in terms of inspiring the next generation. And she said, it's easy today to become an entrepreneur. All you need is one of these iPhones and you've got the world in your hand. And who discovered the iPhone? Another entrepreneur. Okay. It's the world of entrepreneurs.
It's true. What a beautiful, inspiring story, Tony. I love it. So we'll be sure to connect with Tony. We will have the information about the guide that he gave us and, of course, his website, tonypisanelli.com, underneath this video or in the audio version of this interview. It has been a pleasure to speak with you, Tony. One of the most inspiring interviews I've had.
Thank you, Cloris. Likewise. And thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.